Boeing crisis. Boeing Co. is in a public relations crisis after two of its 737 MAX 8 aircraft crashed within 5 months of each other, killing everyone on board. Preliminary inquiries into both accidents, one in Ethiopia and the other in Indonesia, suggest they were caused by a faulty computerized flight control system. It has since come to light that Boeing was aware of the glitch all along, but ignored the problem to extract more money from its customers. Dozens of countries, including all nations in the European Union, grounded the 737 MAX 8 and banned the jet from their airspace. The U.S. Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA, and Boeing insisted the planes were safe, but the assurances sounded oxymoronic.
These planes are accidents waiting to happen until there's some assurance that either the pilots have been better trained or the problems with the aircraft.
The incidents have taken a toll on Boeing's reputation and have eroded the public trust in the world's largest airplane manufacturer. Some observers say the aerospace giant may never recover from the scandal.
The public has lost confidence in Boeing. The international community has lost confidence in Boeing, and their spinmeisters, lobbyists, and public relation firms are spinning 24/7 to try to put some sort of positive face on the disaster, which is essentially their negligence. If anything, they may end up not only having to face the court of public opinion, but civil court in the form of lawsuits as a result of the two crashes, but they may well end up facing criminal charges. It's not unheard of in the United States for a corporation to be charged criminally when people die as a result of their willful negligence, and I think that certainly applies with regard to Boeing.
Fiasco is yet another story of deception, corruption, and cover-up in Washington. It has also raised questions about the cozy relationship between the FAA and the industry it is supposed to regulate.
There's always a question of why we would have a private company certify their product.
Investigators looking into the catastrophic crashes are up against one of America's most powerful corporate political players, with a direct line to the White House. Boeing is one of the nation's top 10 corporate lobbyists, showering money on both Democrats and Republicans. The aerospace giant shells out as much as $21 million a year on lobbying in Washington. Is the Boeing scandal an indictment of corporate America?
It's an indictment of corporate America's greed and wanton disregard for everyday human lives. But to say that the FAA's negligence in this case is just a result of outdated equipment, that doesn't go far enough. The fact of the matter is Boeing has been allowed, because of their political tentacles, to self-regulate. So the FAA, if they'd ever made any true good faith efforts to regulate Boeing, those have been rebuffed. And it is true, Boeing has infiltrated both political parties with their cash. Most surprisingly is the fact they're based in Washington State. That's a state dominated by the Democratic Party. And you've not heard very many public condemnations from the Democratic members of the House, the Democratic senators from the state of Washington. And they should be shamed for that. Because when all is said and done, human life is far more important than their political positions or the campaign donations that Boeing has been showering on both political parties.
Many Americans might not know the FAA has been delegating safety regulations to airlines and aircraft manufacturers themselves.
And it's unacceptable for the FAA to delegate to an airline what is safe, what is not, what they can afford, what they cannot. This should not be an option. Seatbelts, airbags, or whatever in an airline should never be optional. So my view is that until the FAA finally stands up and says that this is something that must change, then we are going to have problems, big problems.
But how did the troubled MAX 8 aircraft come to existence? And what went wrong in the recent catastrophic incidents? The 737 MAX was Boeing's response to stiff competition with Europe's Airbus, which has been eating Boeing's market share. Boeing needed to design a whole new plane that would carry a heavier, fuel-efficient engine to rival that of Airbus. But the process was enormously costly and would take up to 10 years. So the MAX 8 was born, which was essentially a new version of the popular 737 series with a heavier engine shifted forward.
Yes, and that's been the history of major corporations in their thought process and corporate logic for quite some time. Yes, the development of a new aircraft to compete with Airbus would have taken additional time. It would have been a little more costly. But in the overall scheme of things, given the loss of life from 2 crashes, the world would be far better off and the families would be far better off had Boeing erred on the side of caution and done things correctly.
Bolting the heavier engine on the 737 presented problems. When a MAX 8 was in full throttle, like during takeoff, the nose tipped too far upwards. That could cause a stall, one that could lead to a crash. Instead of re-engineering the plane, Boeing compensated by adding software called Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, or MCAS. The process was completed without verification from federal regulators. Did passenger safety take a backseat to financial interests?
The fact that they essentially threw a bunch of new gizmos on an older aircraft and then concealed the issues that they knew internally from the pilots and from the public and from the international community and from international regulators, that's not surprising, because when all is said and done, they're looking at corporate profits and the CEO is looking at his bonus.
Still more shocking, pilots would get only a 2-hour iPad training course before entering a MAX 8 cockpit for the first time. On top of this, the training material did not mention the new MCAS system. So if it malfunctioned, the pilots did not know why or how to solve the problem.
Any model airplane is going to have some differences, and we call it differences training. Apparently, Boeing did not think that this was a substantial enough difference to inform pilots about. Many airlines did not have this. This is what disturbs me. Didn't have the description of this particular system and what it would do. So when the airplane reacted the way it possibly did with Lion Air at this point in time, the pilots didn't know what they have, and they were fighting something at a very low altitude. It became a bucking bronco that they just couldn't settle down.
In 2018, federal authorities received complaints from several American pilots that the 737 MAX aircraft were suddenly nosing down. On October 29, 2018, Lion Aircraft Flight 610 took off from Jakarta. The MAX 8 was in full throttle during takeoff, but the nose of the plane kept lurching downward. The pilots did not know what was causing this and kept fighting with the MCAS system. The software was sending incorrect sensor data to the computer, pushing the plane towards the ground. The plane crashed into the sea 12 minutes after takeoff. 5 months later, pilots of the Ethiopian flight ET-302 experienced the same problem. The pilots did manage to disable the MCAS system, but it was too late to overcome the malfunctioning sensors. The aircraft went down in just 6 minutes after takeoff.
If you don't know why planes are falling out of the sky, what you're doing is betting with passengers' lives and other lives that it won't happen again. And that's not the purpose of safety regulations. The purpose of safety regulations, remember, an aircraft certification says that the plane is safe to fly. It doesn't say we don't know why it's falling out of the sky, so we're going to leave it there. It's completely the opposite of what safety regulators are supposed to do.
Nearly 350 innocent people lost their lives because Boeing tried to solve a hardware problem with a new software in order to save money. The aerospace giant has moved big money around Washington for decades. Now it expects to lean on its network of lawmakers and lobbyists to climb out of the worst crisis in its history.